Good evening, all the participants. Welcome to the day 7 of our knowledge series from CREDA MCHI. And today's the topic is quite serious. That is the Indian Bankruptcy Code. It's not a sector specific issue, but you might be aware of this issue. In means every other day you'll heard in newspaper that any builder or any other company is affected with this in IBC code. So, and we have today with none other than Sangvi, and he's been, I think, done uh, quite intensive work in this thing. I'll just give a brief introduction about the sir. Uh, uh, Talking about his practicing, he's a practicing advocate. Apart from that, he is CS, LLB, LLM, certified forensic, IFRS bank auditor, and qualified independent director as well. Yeah, he has been member of World Bank Insolvency Group on train the trainers jointly with IBBI and IPA, and all three institutes like ICI, ICCI, and ICMAI. He's a regular faculty at Institute of Chartered Accountant and as well as the CS, Nationalized Bank, CAG, and regular author of various corporate and tax journal, majorly in Taxman, Tax Guru, Economics Times, TaxCan, Live Law. He is also an expert on corporate, commercial, and insolvency laws. He is advised and handle insolvency cases having debt of more than 1 lakh crores. And important cases includes JP Infratech, Lanco, SR Steel, SR Oil, Shipping, and so on. The list is so on. He is also an financial activist, filed numerous PL in public interest, and some of the name includes demonetization budget 2017, tribunal members appointment, NCLT composition, and so on. Also, he's in social activities representing in PIL on social cause, uh, the unfortunate Surat fire incident, removal of caste in OBC, uh, formation of permanent commission, parking fee charged illegally, and the list is so on. And the last, he is also an RT activist. Sir has played a vital role in disclosure of willful defaulters by SBI for the first time, a RERA tribunal appointment, and also NCLT members appointment, which was done without the approval of Law Ministry. So, sir, we are glad to have you, sir, today. So, we request you to please start the session.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, Credai, for giving me this opportunity to share my views with the August participants I could see. And as I've been told that professionals as well as business people, business industry side have also come here. So it will be nice to interact. And this law is very near to my heart. And the reason being that I was part of the lawmaking. So I had assisted the government, basically the Joint Parliamentary Committee, when this law was in its formation
The
stage.
initial stages, huh?
And there, yes, and when before, because first time the bill was tabled in Parliament, and thereafter the discussions had happened, and it went to JPC, and that JPC, that's the Joint Parliamentary Committee, debated it, and I was a part of assisting the JPC members. And now the law which we see today, every, I would say, 6 months there is an ordinance to amend this law. And sometimes it becomes so difficult for me, who is an active practitioner in this law, to keep a track of changes, because every 3 months or 6 months they are coming out with new amendments. And real estate industry, as I always say, it's a very complex set of transactions here. And in this complex industry, applying insolvency is altogether very difficult, because when this law was thought of, it was thought of from the angle of bankers, and more so that how much money it could recover, because there were many NPAs. I remember that in 2015, in the formation stage, there was 6 lakh crore of NPA.
My God.
And within a span of less than a year, 2 lakh crore of NPAs could have been resolved by this law. So this law has proved to be a biggest reform legislation, I would say. However, vis-a-vis real estate industry, this only happened more so in 2018 when this JP matter went till Supreme Court and
Correct.
Supreme Court gave numerous guidelines. So today I would be focusing more on the thoughtful process of this law, the conceptual idea, how this law has evolved vis-a-vis real estate, because this law is something which is equally applicable to all the creditors. So whether it is banker, whether it is promoter, whether it is the end user. So more so in our case, it would be the persons who are buying the real estate, whether it is home buyer, whether somebody is buying for business purposes, commercial property. So this law basically went to Supreme Court for home buyers purpose. But when the law got amended, now it takes into ambit all types of persons under RERA. So basically, this law has connected the RERA Act together. So that interplay of insolvency code with RERA, I would also touch upon that part. Now I am sharing my presentation, and I think we would reserve the last 15-20 minutes for the question
Q&A
and
session.
answers. And in case there is something that is becoming important and you are not able to get what the point is, so you can very well write it in the Q&A section. I will try to respond it. So I think first I would take the conceptual part, how this law evolved and what is its use today. So broadly, these are the agendas which we are going to cover today. And broadly speaking, this is the data which is available officially from the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India. Just like we have RBI for banks, SEBI for listed companies. So in case of insolvency law, there is a board called IBBI. That's called Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India. So basically, IBBI has released the data that as on date, there are around 183 cases which have been admitted. Some 22 have been pending in appeals or either got settled. 11, they made the payment and it got withdrawn. 6 cases they have resolved. So these data is of 31st March 2020. So that means almost after 3 years. So basically this law came on 1st December 2016. So speaking technically 17, 18, 19 and first quarter of 20. So this data belongs to 3 years where resolution plan has been able to come only in 6 companies, whereas other companies it has gone into liquidation. So 17 companies are under liquidation. Now what do we mean by resolution plan? What do we mean by liquidation? This I will clarify as we proceed during our presentation. So this was just to give you an overview how this law has responded specific to real estate industry. However, I would touch upon the complete law, and this is my usual practice of discussing any law. This law, as the name suggests, is Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. So moving reverse, we need to first understand what is code. Then I will come on to what is bankruptcy, and then I will come on to insolvency, because that is how we should know what the law wants to say. So first of all, this is a code and it's not like any other law. Like you must have read about RERA. So it's an act, Real Estate Regulation and Development Act. Must have read about Consumer Protection Act. I think this web series includes all the laws which are act. But interestingly, this is not an act. It's a code. So code is something which is much more than an act. It codifies more than one law. And in India, to the best of my knowledge, there are only 4 codes till date. So, first three, I have just listed it for the benefit of all: CPC, CRPC, IPC. So, these three are codes. Now, what does this mean? This means that a code is much bigger than a law. It codifies different acts. And normally speaking, code always have something which is having an overriding effect on the act. So if there is a conflict between code and an act, the code will win. That's how we put it. How it will win, what would be the inconsistency, I will tell in the coming slide. So shortly I am putting, suppose there is something which real estate act says, that is RERA law says, and something what is insolvency code says, then who will prevail? It will be the insolvency code that will prevail. The act will not prevail, but the code will prevail. Let's say income tax act says something. Let's say the act says that if the, let's say the builder company is not able to pay its taxes, income tax law says that the accounts can be attached, it can be freezed. So code says it cannot be freeze, income tax cannot be paid first, and the assets will be paid first to the home buyers. So the alignment has changed. So if there is a conflict between code and an act, so code will prevail. And shortly speaking, all tax laws are in rank number 2. And as a home buyer, we are in the rank number 1. So this is generally what is the perception. Now I will tell you what are the nuances and how this priority has changed post IBC. Before IBC, this was not the law. Before IBC, tax laws were having the priority. Statutory dues were having the priority. Now the person who has purchased the property has the priority. How this law evolved? So I would say this law is inspired from US, UK, and Australia law of insolvency. Now, the most famous insolvency laws, if I would say, across globe is that of US. In US, they use the word bankruptcy. And president, now he is no more the president, but Mr. Trump. I always take this example to tell Mr. Trump, all these 6 companies, they were into business of hotel and casinos, they have been declared bankrupt. How many times? Only 6 times. So that's the beauty, that a person who is bankrupt can become president of the most powerful country in the world. In India, when we say that a person has not paid, we see that that person as a negative person in the society. We attach negative things against him and his business and treat him as somebody who has done a fraud with the people. However, this is not the case. There could be a situation, there could be a business which practically speaking may not have worked properly. There may not be fault of the promoter. So therefore this law has evolved. Now this US law says that if somebody has not been able to run a business, maybe due to economic situation, maybe due to business condition, maybe due to XYZ reasons. Like for example, if somebody was having a hotel and due to corona he could not run the hotel for 6 months, he prepared a new hotel and corona hit, and for next 6 months his account will become NPA. He will not be able to pay the banks. So is it his fault? So something which is not in his control, it can't be blamed. So therefore there is an easy exit system in US. However, in India, easy exit system was not there. I faintly remember that when IBC was being discussed, all the reports said that in India, to close down a company, the average time period is 6 years. Average time period, and the highest time is 18 years. So the laws in India were so scattered, there was no single law, and there was no easy exit option. So if a person has not been able to perform well, not been able to pay his creditors, to close down his company, it would take him longer period. Therefore, it was thought that there should be one law where all the creditors stand in a queue, payment is made, whatever is possible, and company be closed. Now, here I want to tell you very importantly, if somebody has done fraud with the public, somebody has siphoned off money from the creditor, then this law is not good for him. This law is made with the intention that the person who is involved in this particular company has not been able to do business genuinely. It is not for fraudsters. For fraudsters, there are penal provisions under this law also. So this is only for a easy exit option, or I would say easy revival of the company. For this, it is possible that the company may change its hands with new promoters, new owners would come in and buy the company and revive the company. the person who is going to buy the company will buy the company at such a price which is the best possible market price of the assets of the company. So I will take you to how the payment would be made, what would be the minimum value. But just for a moment now think that this law in US is applied to India. Forget about insolvency code. So can we call all these three people in India? Because they have also defaulted the banks. Is it possible? So I think on a lighter side, forget about if they have done some fraud or not, assuming that they have not done some fraud and actually their businesses were not doing well, then probably IBC could have been a good option for them today. Now, let's see how IBC law is planned. So, there are two terminologies in IBC, as I said, insolvency and bankruptcy. So, when I use the word insolvency, so a company becomes insolvent, LLP becomes insolvent. Insolvent means a state when a person is not able to pay its debts. Now, if the company becomes insolvent and nobody is ready to purchase that company will go under liquidation and ultimately close. However, if an individual is not able to pay, he will become bankrupt. So, when I'm talking in US, the bankruptcy is something different. When I'm talking in India, the bankruptcy is something different. In India, the bankruptcy is used for the persons who are individual, not for the companies, because companies in India are either insolvent and go to become liquidated if they are not able to pay the debts. Now, there are three stages for companies. Now, I will only talk about companies. Why? Because as of now, insolvency and bankruptcy code in India is applicable to companies. For individuals, they have still not notified the law. For some class of individuals who are guarantor to company, they have notified the law, but Mr. Anil Ambani's case, which was the first in India, has been challenged in Supreme Court. So practically speaking, today the law is not for individuals, or as of now it is pending in Supreme Court. However, for corporates, the law is very much into place, and for 3 years it has been doing wonders. Company become insolvent when the NCLT admits the company for insolvency resolution process. So it is called corporate insolvency resolution process when the insolvency gets triggered. Insolvency gets triggered when the NCLT is satisfied that the company is not able to pay its creditors. Now, what type of creditors that we will discuss in coming slides? Two types, operational and financial. Now, during this resolution process, the process period is 180 days. That is the period prescribed under law. However, there could be a breather for 90 days. So 270 days. Now, in this 270 days, if there is no buyer to buy the company will go for liquidation. Then, in liquidation, the company's assets will be sold by the liquidator. But this 270 days at the max, it could be 180 days normally without any extension. Then the company's buyer would be called by insolvency professional. So insolvency professional is appointed by NCLT. Now, who can be the insolvency professional? A person needs to qualify an exam to become an insolvency professional, and the eligibility to give the exam is 10 years of a chartered accountant, a company secretary, cost accountant, advocate, an MBA or a banker. They have 15 years. They have a higher time period to clear the exam. So if they all clear this exam, they are able to become insolvency professional. Thereby, insolvency professional is appointed for this period, and there is a process which has to be followed. If that process fails, then the company will be liquidated. After liquidation, that is 1 year prescribed in the law, the company will be closed down. So this is the broad process. Now we will discuss the each step in detail. So there are four terminologies which I think most of my professional friends who are here, they would be able to uh, understand what's the difference. For others, Insolvency means the process when it gets started, then it is called insolvency process. So once the company is admitted, it means NCLT has accepted that company will not be able to pay its creditors. However, before insolvency, that is 2016, when if a company was not able to meet the payments, then a winding up petition used to be filed in the High Court. After giving a 21-day notice, a winding petition was to be filed in the High Court, and then High Court, if deemed fit, would appoint an official liquidator to directly wind up the company. Under Insolvency Code, there is no process of winding up. So now this winding up definition, wording is not there. So now you have insolvency or liquidation. You don't have winding up. Now, as I told you, after this 6 months period or 180 period, 180 days period, with extension of 90 days, it may become 270 days. If this process fails of getting a buyer, then it will be liquidated. So it will be called liquidation process. Now, as per law, liquidation process has to be completed within 1 year. So broadly speaking, 6 months here, one year there. So 1.5 years, company is closed. So they have made the law very short, very specific, so that people are able to close down the company easily. Now, in case the individual is there, he is not able to pay, he will be first called as insolvent, and ultimately he would be called bankrupt if he is not able to pay all his creditors. Therefore, the word used is bankruptcy for individuals. So, four terminologies I have cleared. For companies, now we will only use the two words insolvency and liquidation. Forget winding up and bankruptcy when we are talking for companies. Now, I have got a query whether IBC is applicable to LLP. Yes, IBC is applicable to LLP, to companies registered under Companies Act. It could be public limited, private limited, listed company. All companies are included under IBC. LLP is included under IBC. Individuals are included, but the law is pending to be notified by the government. Some part of it was notified, that is challenged in Supreme Court. So that is one part of the story. Now somebody would ask me, cooperative societies are included? No, they are not included. So other trust societies, they are not included in IBC. Now first, let's understand what is insolvency. So to become an insolvent and declare a person as insolvent, it is important to understand how a person will become insolvent. So I have taken a very simple example. A simple balance sheet is before you. Land value is 150, maybe lakhs, maybe crores. Building is of 40. Cash is around 10. Now, let's assume that this is a hotel, maybe a resort, where the land is having a good value, building value is less than land, and the promoter has taken a loan. So let's say this 75 is the loan. Now, let's say this particular loan maybe in January 2020, maybe forget about that Supreme Court giving some relief to the loan moratorium and all. Assume that they are not able to pay for 6 months. Can we say that this company is become insolvent because it is not able to pay the EMI? So basically, loan is 75. They have only 10 rupees cash to pay. Because the business is not going on, they are not able to get revenue. Because hotels are closed, they don't have money. What to do? Let's say it was opened also, but their money is very less, only to meet the expenditure of the hotel, but not so much to pay the banks. Now, can I say that this company is not able to pay banks, therefore it should be insolvent? Now, most of us will say that I am having a net worth which is positive. What is net worth? Net worth is assets minus liability. So assets value is 200, liability value is 75. So we have a positive net worth of 125. So can I say that I have a positive net worth? Answer is yes, we have a positive net worth. But whether this positive net worth will help us to become solvent? So as per IBC, if the company is not able to pay this loan, it will become insolvent. So, as per the latest limits, I am telling you, as per the latest limit, the limit is 1 crore or more rupees. If the company is not able to pay, there is a default of more than 1 crore, then the company can be declared insolvent. So, here, let's say the loan has been given by State Bank of India. Yes, they can file for insolvency. Company can file for insolvency, bank can file for insolvency. Both of them can go and file this company for insolvency. Now let us take another example. So forget about the last line. Let's first see the balance sheet. Now here in this case, loan is 30 rupees and reserve and surplus are 45 rupees. 125 is the capital. So here the loan is less. Therefore, if it is required, we can pay the money. Correct? We can pay the money, no issue. We will be able to liquidate funds, get the money, pay them off. Can I call this company insolvent? So answer normally would be it's not an insolvent company. Now think about this as a company who has a litigation of tax maybe pending in Supreme Court. That 500 rupees, I am saying 500 crores litigation is pending in Supreme Court. Now tomorrow, let's say this 500 rupees case is being fought by the company and the result is negative. Supreme Court finally decides that company has to pay 500 rupees to income tax department. Can I say that this company is insolvent? Yes, company becomes insolvent because one litigation can completely destroy your balance sheet. Sometimes it happens that companies take a stand, fight the matter maybe below court, then high court, then Supreme Court. But during the process of this litigation, they come to know that boss, I am going to fail. If they are able to understand that they are going to fail, then they should go for declaring themselves as insolvent before only. So that is a new thing which I am going to tell you today. The crux is if you think that your company's liability are going to increase, it is better to go for insolvency. Now all of you must be having a query that if we go for insolvency, will we be able to save not paying this 500 rupees? Answer is yes. How? That we will discuss. The balance sheet which I told you and this litigation pending in the off balance sheet, not it was not in the balance sheet, but this litigation come and hit the company. On this case, if you remember, some weeks ago, Supreme Court gave an order that this much crore rupees is payable by telecom companies. And Mr. Birla, Kumar Mangalam Birla, came in the press and said that if this is a situation, we will become bankrupt. We will become insolvent. So he used the word insolvent. Why? Because maybe they were having a healthy balance sheet, but this litigation money they did not provide it for in the balance sheet. They did not make a provision and said that we are very hopeful that we will win the case. However, they were aware that they are going to lose the case because they did not win at any of the forums below. So sometimes such a case might happen. So what I am trying to tell you is this IB code has become the BAP of all laws. To put it in a lighter sense, I always say IB code is like our Amitabh Bachchan. So he's the BAP of all laws, he's the BAP of all actors. Therefore, this law has a very interesting one-liner section that is called 238, which says that this law will override any other law for time being in force. How will this help us? That I am going to discuss. But broadly, if there is a conflict between this law and income tax, this law and sale tax, this law and RERA, this law and consumer, everything will stop and this law will provide the guidance how the company's procedure will be followed. So, how the company's procedure will be followed and how the payments would be made to creditors and who will be given priority is the only crux of this whole code. Now let's understand how insolvency gets started. So insolvency can be started by three category of persons. One is the creditors who have given some goods or services to the company and company has not made payment to them. Second is those creditors who have given money to the company, maybe as a borrowing, maybe on loan, maybe to get some interest, maybe as a credit facility. All those, maybe banks, maybe NBFCs, maybe their relatives, maybe their friends, maybe their sister concern. Any creditor who has given finance to the company is called financial creditor. So if bank does not get the money for the loan on the scheduled date, obviously if the default is more than 1 crore, they can file for insolvency. Just a minute. Third category is the company itself. So as Mr. Kumar Mangalam Birla was telling, if the company thinks that yes, I am going to be insolvent, they can go for filing the insolvency application before NCLT. Now let us understand who are these operational creditors. So some example could be trade creditors. Somebody has supplied, let's say in real estate company, somebody has supplied cement, somebody has supplied steel, somebody supplied bricks, all those people, and they are not paid. So yes, there's a default. Yes, then the insolvency can be triggered. Laborers are not made the labor is not given the wages. Employees have not been paid. Some rent has to be paid by the company that is not paid. Maybe electricity bill has not been paid. Water bill is not paid. Any bills not paid. Tax department dues, income tax, sale tax, service tax, any tax, municipal tax also. They are all operational creditors. Then financial creditors. So bank, NBFCs, lenders. So now let us understand what the law says. Law says these are people who have provided goods, who have provided services, who have to be paid sale tax. That is a tax by the government. It may be central government, it may be state government, it could be local authority. All these three type of categories, if any money is paid by payable by the company and not paid on time, and there is a default committed, and there is no dispute with regard to that. So dispute could be, let's say income tax department gave a 15 crore show cause notice to the company, and company is fighting with the case in the court. Then it is not a default because it becomes a disputed debt. There has to be a clear debt. Let's say a order has been passed against the company and no appeal has been preferred. So that amount will become final. If appeal is filed and matter is pending in court, it's a different issue. If not, then that particular creditor can file insolvency after giving a 10 days notice. So a 10 days notice has to be given to the company that you please make the payment. If you do not make the payment, then we will file a petition before NCLT and take the company to the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Court for initiation of corporate insolvency resolution process. That is the crux. Now, I am not going to nitty gritties. What is dispute? How is dispute calculated? All those will become hyper technical. So I'm just simply putting who can go. So operational creditors is over. Operational creditor, I have told you as per definition, only five types of people are there. So goods, services, labor or employees, any dues to central government, state government, and local authority. So all these people are operational creditors. Now let's understand what is financial creditors. So I'm very generally telling what is financial creditors. Why I am discussing this definition, you will come to know when we go and connect this with RERA. So financial creditors are those who are having financial debt with the company. Now, what is financial debt? Any money which is borrowed with interest. So payment of interest. Any amount raised for credit facility. So sometimes company put their shares and take the loan on the shares. Then it could be debentures, it could be notes, anything. Then it could be financial lease. Some company like ILFS do financial leasing. Then debtors are sold to the factoring bank and payment is get. So if I am going to receive payment from my debtors, I sell those debtors to the factoring company and get the money upfront. So that is also financial debt. Or, now this is very important, clause F, any amount raised under any transaction having forward purchase or sale or having any commercial effect of borrowing will be classified as a financial debt. So if there is a transaction having commercial effect of borrowing, then financial debt it will be categorized. Now commercial effect of borrowing is very important. How to find out this is commercial effect of borrowing? In very simple term, if company has some money, maybe not by naming it as loan, but if that money is used by the company as for its like just like a borrowing from the bank, then also it will take the flavor of financial debt. This is what the clause F says. So we will come back to clause F after going through some examples. So the first example would be, I am a home buyer and I have taken a allotment in a real estate project. So I am a home buyer, I have paid something and I have taken that particular unit. Now, whether I am a financial creditor or I am an operational creditor. So this is the issue before the court. So now I am telling you year wise what has happened. In 2017, NCLT Delhi said that you are neither operational creditor nor financial creditor. Why? Because operational creditor says the person has to supply goods or service to the company. So let's say XYZ Builder Private Limited. So they are the real estate company. I have bought from them. So I have paid the money. I have not supplied goods or service. Paying money is not a service. So I'm out from the definition of operational creditor. Now let's go to the financial creditor. What does financial creditor says? I should have given money on interest. So when I am buying a property, I am not giving it on interest. So I'm out from the financial creditor. So they held that neither operational nor financial. So this was the first judgment in Feb 2017. That means just 2 months after the insolvency code came. Now, kindly understand, if you are not operational nor financial, you do not form part of the initiation of insolvency. After this, Feb 17 said, you are nowhere there. In July 2017, one judgment of NCLAT, that means Appellate Court of NCLT, they said that home buyer are financial creditor because the agreement with the builder said that builder said if I have not delivered you project, let's say in 24 months, I will pay you so much so interest. If I deliver you this much, if I don't deliver this much. So basically they said that we are giving you assured return. Therefore, because of this assured return, your particular contract becomes financial creditor. So now what happened? Confusion in the market. One judgment says you are not operational nor financial. In another judgment says if clause in the agreement is of assured return, like interest, like compensation, then you are clear as a financial creditor. This controversy came into picture and government came out with a third category called other creditors. So if you are not operational nor financial, then you are others. And they also issued a form F. So in green box, you would see the form F was issued. Why? Because JP matter came under insolvency. So in JP case, JP Infra Limited, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of JP Limited, JP Group, there they came under insolvency and 25,000 crore odd figure was of home buyers and only 7,500 crore was around from some 50, 60 banks, NBFCs and all lenders. So what happened? Home buyers who had got some assured return or something in the agreement, they are FC. Otherwise, they are operational creditors, OC. So therefore, they came out with this third category. Now, what is the difficulty? Now, you please see the chart which I have given on the screen. Right hand side, you will find the flow of money. In the case of a company which is not able to pay its creditors, So let's say the 100 rupees is the value of the total creditors, operational, financial, and others. And the asset value of the company is only 40 rupees, 40. So that means 60 rupees will never come. Only 40 rupees will be fetched from the assets of the company. Now this 40 rupees has to be distributed as per this particular waterfall. We call it waterfall. Why we call it waterfall? Because from the first level, if you pass the water, only if that particular group has the, let's say, has so much thirst, they will exhaust that money. So if first level has 10 rupees to be paid, then 40 minus 10, 30 will only go to the second level. In third out in second level, let's say 5 rupees has to be paid. Then 30 minus 5, 25 will come in the third level. So every level, whatever is the outstanding amount, that amount will be set off. And we call it waterfall because water will only fall if it is left. If that water is being drunk by the people in that particular category, it will not go into the second level. So popularly it is called waterfall. Now let's understand what is waterfall. Like 40 rupees I told you have to pay. Now first who has to be paid? This 180 days process has to be done by the insolvency professional. So the money has to be incurred by that person on the functioning of the company. So he becomes the board of the director of the company. All board of director gets suspended and he has to follow the company's working. So if he is to run the company, he has to pay the cost. That is insolvency process cost. And assuming that company goes into liquidation, he might have to incur some, he might have to keep some money aside for liquidation. So let's say he keeps 10 rupees for insolvency process cost, 5 rupees for liquidation cost. So 40 minus 10 minus 5. So 40 minus 15. So we are left with 25. Now from the 25, he will have to first pay to workers for 24 months. So last 24 months means if suppose insolvency started on 1st January 2020. So minus 2 years from 1st January 20. So 19 and 18. So 1st January 18, then 19 full complete year, 2 years, 24 months has to be paid. Then if workers are being paid, let's say 5 rupees. So now you have 20 rupees. Now from that 20 rupees, you will pay to secured creditors. Now who are the secured creditors? Let's say State Bank of India has financed. So they are the secured creditors. So out of 25 rupees which you have, you will have to pay them bank. So bank are paid here. Now whatever money is left, you have to first pay to employees. Let's say we are left with 10 rupees and we have to pay to employees 5 rupees. So 5 rupees is gone. Now unsecured financial creditor means sometimes NBFCs who do not take any security and they give you loan. Most of the NBFCs generally don't take security and they give you unsecured loan. Now let's say the unsecured financial creditors claim is 50 rupees, but you are left with only 5 rupees. So nobody will get any money beyond secured creditors, beyond unsecured creditors, and all these four levels pending: crown debts, secured creditor, other debt, preference shareholder, and equity shareholder. They will get nothing, zero. So that is the beauty of this particular law, that whoever are besides, see, this is a queue basically. Whoever are in the top rank will get the money. Whoever at the end lane will get nothing. So when I'm saying crown debts, if you see fourth last slab, crown debts means central government, state government, municipal authority, all these are crown debts. Crown debts means dues to central government, state government, or local authority. And unpaid dues of secured creditor, what does this mean? Like SBI has given 100 rupees and they have security only of 40 rupees. So that's 60 rupees, which is the unsecured portion of secured creditor, comes here. Clear? So this is the frequency, how the money is flowing. If there is any doubt, you can ask in Q&A section, because this is very, very important table which I have just explained. Complete insolvency and bankruptcy code is dependent on this one slide. How the money is distributed with all the stakeholders in the waterfall. We call it waterfall. So that is very important for you all. If there is any question, I would like to answer here, because this is very important to move forward. Any queries? I can't see any queries. Okay. So let's move on to the subsequent slide. So now you are aware of the process, how the money would be paid. So normally speaking, if you see third last level, that is other debt. Normally operational creditors, that means suppliers who have given goods to the company and they are not paid, are coming in the third level. So if you would have seen, and many cases were filed in SR Steel. So just a disclaimer, I was also an advocate in SR Steel. But that is the biggest case till date in insolvency. More than 1 lakh crore of debt was involved. And ultimately, it was resolved. It was taken over by ArcelorMittal. But many of the trade creditors opposed this particular law in Supreme Court because they got nothing. Because of this waterfall, they were standing last in the queue. Okay, so there is a query of Mr. Nirav Parmar. Can you please share the chart with illustration of amount in the waterfall for more understanding? Okay, so what I will do is I will just repeat it how it goes. Whatever is due and payable, let's say 100 rupees is the total debt which the company has to pay to all the persons, financial creditor, operational creditor, and other creditors. And company is having only 40 rupees as the liquidation value. Why I'm telling you liquidation value means the best possible value which the company's assets can fetch. So there is basically apparently 100 minus 40 is 60 rupees, which we generally call haircut. What is haircut? That means 60 rupees no creditor will get. Now, how 40 rupees will be distributed is as per the waterfall. So now in this waterfall, what would be the fixed amount? So your fixed amount would be how much to pay to workers, how much to pay to the secured creditors. So I gave you the example of secured creditor, means State Bank of India is a secured creditor. Then employees, you would be knowing what is the employee due. Then unsecured financial creditor. So all those amounts total from top to bottom, total outstanding will be 100 rupees. But you have only 40 rupees. So you will pay 40 rupees in this priority. So the debts of the person will be satisfied who are in the top priority, and debts of the person will not be satisfied who are last in the priority. Priority will be ranking wise only. So as I suggested, I have 40 rupees. Now let's say insolvency process is 5 rupees. So I'm left with 35. Liquidation cost is, let's say, 2 rupees. I am left with 33. Here, let's say worker dues is 10 rupees. So I'm left with 23. Then I have to pay to banks, let's say 15 rupees. So 23 minus 15, I have 8 rupees. Now let's say in employees, I have to pay 5 rupees. So 12 minus 5, 7. Now let's say this 7 and unsecured financial creditor claim is 20 rupees. I will pay only 7. Rest all person will get nothing. Write off. Bad debts for everybody else. You will not move forward in the table because you don't have money. So that is how this process works. I hope, Mr. Parmar, now your query would have been resolved. I will come back to this chart again after we finish the process. So let me move forward now in the process. How does this process happen? So in creditor gives a notice, like banks or maybe the operational creditor, they will give a notice, get some response, they will go to NCLT. The creditor will file an insolvency petition. Now, when an insolvency petition is filed in the NCLT, court will issue notice to the company that yes, tell us, explain why we should not admit your case under insolvency. Now, at this stage, if court deems that Yes, there is some problem in the application. They may ask the creditor to rectify. There could be some mistake, apparently some problem, maybe some defect in the application. 7 days time can be given to rectify. And no 7 days time if given and they think that application is okay, fine, then the case can be admitted. Like in some cases, company themselves comes and says, sir, we don't have money to pay. What about this creditor? We don't have money to pay any creditor. So NCLT can admit that matter. So that is admission. Now law says 14 days, but practically speaking, I have seen 2 years also pending in NCLT, and it could be as short as 3 to 4 months also. It depends on how much litigation it happens from both the sides. So anybody, operational or financial, can file for insolvency, but other creditors cannot file for insolvency. So operational can file, financial can file. So you have to go by the definition whether you are operational or financial, only then you can file. Other creditors cannot file. Now, once the case is admitted, court gives in the order name of the insolvency professional to be appointed as an insolvency professional for that company. So he is called interim resolution professional, and he will in within 30 days call a meeting of creditors. Now, though the name is called Committee of Creditors meeting, however, this Committee of Creditors only and only is constituted of financial creditors. So, who are financial creditors? As I've already explained you, even by the definition, all those clauses, who have basically funded the company, they are called Committee of Creditors. Now, whether home buyer, whether shop buyer will be a part of this Committee of Creditors or not. So this question I am keeping pending. I will come back to this, but I am just now discussing how the process is moving forward. These committee of creditors will either confirm this insolvency professional to work for next 180 days total minus 30 because he has already worked. So 150 days, they will decide whether this person should continue or not. And after 150 days, if the company gets a good bidder, then it is called resolution plan. It will be approved by committee of creditors with a majority of 66 if they want to revive the company. So in our example, 100 rupees debt, 40 rupees is the liquidation value. So if somebody comes and says, I want to buy for 20 rupees, so committee of creditors will not agree because 40 rupees they are going to get in liquidation also. But if somebody comes and says, I am ready to give it for 45, they will agree. Now, how much agreement in COC has to be there? So law says 66%. Previously it was 75. Now it has been reduced to 66%. So if two-thirds are agreeable, then yes, procedure can be moved forward. If they two-thirds or 66% people do not agree, company will go into liquidation. And after they approve, then this resolution professional, the insolvency professional is called resolution professional. In during this process of resolution, he will file an application with NCLT, and NCLT, after reviewing the plan and in accordance with all the applicable laws, then they will permit that this company can be revived. So for example, in case of JP Infra, it has been resolution plan was filed. It was filed by Adani and various other real estate companies, but ultimately it went to the government-owned NBCC. So NBCC was the resolution applicant, or in simple language, successful bidder for the company, and its plan was approved by the NCLT Allahabad. So JP Infra, I am giving you example. So here in this chart, when the case is admitted, this type of a public announcement is given in the newspaper by the interim resolution professional. Now you can see, I would just want you all to go through the Form A for a minute and understand how the public announcement is given. So the name of the company is given. What is the registration address? Then date of incorporation, date of insolvency commencement. Then when this 180 days period will get end, last date of submission of claim. So here when the public announcement is done, they give a 14 days time period for inviting claim. Now in 14 days time period, they ask for claims to be invited for calling the first meeting of COC. Now first meeting of COC, I have told you, it includes all the financial creditors. Now my question to you all is whether when I am a home buyer in this JP Infra case, I will be an operational creditor, or I will be a financial creditor, or I will be other creditor. And when I have to file a claim in this particular case, you can see in the down below form B, C, D. B is for operational creditor, C is for financial creditor, D is for other workers and employees. Where I would fall. And if you remember in that green block, I told you there is a form F for other creditors. So B, C, D, F. I am a home buyer. Which form should I file? So I am asking you all, which form should I file? Can anybody answer me in the Q&A box? I will happy to receive your queries and your response with respect to filing of form. I think nobody has posted anything as of now. I hope my question is clear to all. Who would become the part of the committee of creditors? And what would be the claim form? Whether it would be B, whether it would be C, D, or F. So I am not seeing any replies. Okay. Okay. So I've received two answers. Very good. So that means you all are attentive. Neerav ji has answered. Priya ji has answered. Mr. Nikhil Adil. Very good. I can get 5 answers. So Mr. Neerav is saying form F. Mr. Shetul is saying form F. Then Miss Priya is saying form F. Mr. Nikhil is saying form C. Okay, form C. So basically, Nikhil Bhai wants to say that he is a financial creditor. Mr. Adil is saying form B if interest is involved. And then Mr. Saket is saying form F. Okay. So I think I have got some answers. Only one answer is for form C, that is financial creditor. Rest all I suppose are with the answer form F. So let me clarify what would be the answer. So that what should be the answer? I have till now not explained because this is something which happened post this particular JP case. The Mr. Anuj Jain, who was the appointed insolvency professional, he said that home buyer cannot be financial creditor because they have not supplied goods, they have not supplied services, neither they have given money on loan to the real estate company. Therefore, they would be other creditors. That was his interpretation. Now, this matter, how does this matter is important? Because if they are not part of this committee of creditors, who would take the decision? Decision would be taken by the bankers. Now, decision by the bankers means 7,500 crore rupees, I told you, was outstanding from bankers. And 25,000 crore was outstanding from home buyers. Now 7,500 crore will only sit in the meeting room, sit in the board meeting room. You can see these people. They are all bankers who had given loan, obviously monitored the company, got financials of the company time to time, and now they have taken the company to insolvency because IDBI was the bank which had taken this company to insolvency. Now you see board of directors on the above. You can see board of directors, Mr. Gore and company and family. They were the board of directors. They are out because they are suspended board. When the insolvency triggers, the powers of the board of directors stand suspended. So they are no longer powerful. Who becomes powerful? This committee of creditors, because every decision for the company will be taken by the COC. But you see, what is the problem in the law? 25,000 crore people standing outside and 7,500 crore worth of people sitting inside. So 7,500 crore people will decide the fate of 25,000 crore people in value terms. This matter went to Supreme Court and various debates, so many orders, and thereafter they directed union government to make appropriate amendment. And Supreme Court said that home buyers or the persons who have given money to the real estate company are financial creditor. Why they are financial creditor? Let us understand. Clause F, coming back to the definition, any amount having the commercial effect of borrowing. Supreme Court said that they are included in this. That is what the interpretation by Supreme Court was in the interim. Thereafter, after this Supreme Court order, interim order, I would say, union government, central government made an amendment by way of ordinance. You know how they are famous for bringing ordinance without going it through the parliament. They brought an ordinance immediately on 6th June 2018, which was then confirmed on 17th August when the parliament sat, saying that our intention was always to include the allottees as financial creditors. So you see in red, I have written the explanation, which is by way of an amendment brought by the central government in the law, which was then duly approved by the parliament also. And the explanation says that if the allottee has put money in the real estate project, he is considered to be an allottee for the purpose of becoming a financial creditor. There is no confusion, and this is an explanation. Now, my lawyer friends here would agree with me. An explanation means from the day one, the law was this. They are only clarifying, they are only explaining, they are not amending the law, they are not putting new thing in the law. They are only trying to say this was my intention from the day one. So therefore, they are included in the financial creditor. So point what I am trying to make is, yes, now there is no confusion. If it is a real estate project and it's an allottee, he is a financial creditor. Now your query would be, if I am a financial creditor, what form should I file? So I suppose you are now aware. Let's go back. So you are financial creditor, form C. So the correct answer would be form C. I think Mr. Nikhil had given the right answer. So that's good that Mr. Nikhil, he is aware about the nuances, and whatever he thought is what approved by the Supreme Court. Now, if he is not an allottee, then it is a difficult thing. If he is not an allottee, then he would be other creditors, because then he can't be operational creditor. That is clear. If somebody has given money and he is not an allottee, we all know allottee. As per RERA, if he is an allottee, yes, he becomes a financial creditor. Now, when the insolvency starts, if I have invested money, what is the documentation I have to prove to this insolvency professional? So in this case, Mr. Anuj Jain. So I have to give him agreement of sale, letter of allotment, how payment I have made, any other documents through which I can say that yes, this is the documentation. Yes, to prove I have put the money. Now, another important question which comes, if these people are financial creditors, so 25,000 crore rupees they have collected from home buyers. So probably those home buyers are 15,000, 20,000 in number. Now, can I call 15,000 people in a meeting group and discuss that what should be done forward? So let's understand this particular committee of creditors. People sitting here, only 15,000 people, and you have to put everything on discussion. Not possible? Yes, this happened. It was not possible. So they brought a concept of authorized representative. Now, authorized representative concept is the insolvency professional will have to appoint authorized representative who would represent the home buyer. So let's say Mr. Anuj Jain in this case was the professional. He will have to appoint another insolvency professional to represent these group of people. So that the law says, I'm not going into details of every rule and regulation, but I'm broadly explaining three insolvency professional name he has to give, and out of those three, voting would be done, and one person would represent the complete home buyer case. And there is a slab from, it could be 3, it could be 5, it could be 10. There's a slab. So that could be done, and through them, representative of home buyer will sit in the committee of creditor. So whatever meeting, let's say I have to do a meeting after 10 days. I am the insolvency professional of JP Infra. So I will make an agenda floated to the COC members. That agenda will be given to authorized representative who will in turn circulate it with 15,000 people. And those 15,000 people will tell him to vote yes or no on a particular agenda item. So practically 15,000 people will not come into the discussion, but their role would be restricted to only voting agenda items. And he will take the voting and then represent it. And if he receives 50% or more voting in a favor of a particular agenda, he will say yes in the meeting. If less than 50% he gets the votes, then he will say no. Simple, very simple. Now, if the agreement provides that there is a delay in possession, so there could be a delay in possession, delay in payment, all those things, if written in the agreement, the rate of interest will be as per the agreement. But suppose the agreement is silent. In that case, IBC law says 8% would be rate of interest. So it is provided if nothing is written in the agreement, then the amount due plus interest would be 8%. Now this is a form CA. So we talked about all those forms. So this new form has been introduced for financial creditors in a class. So normally they create class and then project wise class they create, and they ask for this claim. So now under this waterfall, you see when they were claiming to be other creditors, they were coming in the third last slab. So they might have got nothing. But now when you say they are secured financial creditor, they come in the third rank from top. So first, second, and third. Now they will get some money. That is the whole funda of this flowchart. Waterfall. We technically call it waterfall. So I think this particular process I have explained. Now I am going to a step ahead. If there were some cases against JP pending in civil court, filed by home buyers, obviously when they will not get possession on time, they will go to civil court, they might go to RERA court, they might go to consumer court, or they might go to all three courts. Possible. We don't know. There could be different types of people and appearing before different courts. And we all are aware there is no bar. RERA and consumer can go parallelly. And civil court can go on for all damages, mental harassment, and anything. Now, when IBC is triggered, now assume a situation of JP when IBC was triggered, insolvency was triggered. All these cases come to a standstill. Now, why this is standstill? Why they are all stopped? Because IBC law says that moratorium exists for this 180 days. If extended, it could be 270 days. But this moratorium will be there until this resolution process works. So moratorium means no cases against the company can exist. Case by the company can exist. So nobody can file case against JP. They can only file the claim. and claim will go to Anuj Jain, not to anybody else. Now, suppose a matter against the company was pending in High Court, that matter will be automatically stayed. Obviously, he will have to represent through an advocate to stay the matter, but the law says section 14 very clear. All action against the company will get stayed. Whether pending in any court, they will get stayed. Now, if suppose I have not got possession from, let's say, Ansal, I'm taking the example because it's in public domain. So Ansal did not give me one of the case I'm discussing. Ansal Housing did not give the possession on time to the person who had brought the who was an LOT who had paid money. So they filed a case in RERA, got a decree that that money should be paid, and even then they did not get the money. So on the basis of the order of RERA, they filed an insolvency case against the company. Now, obviously, Ansal is big group. They have money also, and their intention may not be of not giving him the property. Ultimately, the matter got settled and insolvency was withdrawn, but insolvency got admitted. I'm not going into a particular case. Just for the reference, I was taking this example. JP also I am taking because it's in public domain. All those cases are in public domain that insolvency started because of one buyer also. Many such cases are there. So all the members of the builder association, I suppose CREDAI also, and many of other associations were there who had taken up this matter with the government that even one buyer can initiate insolvency, and possibly there could be 10 projects in a company. 9 are going well, but because of some issue, one project I am not able to deliver. In that case, why insolvency should be started? Just because one buyer or one project is maybe faulty or maybe there is some issue, to this government took this consideration, and then they brought an amendment that minimum 100 people would be required to file a case. So either it would be 100 or 10% of the total allotee. So let's say it's a small project, total allottees are 50. So then in that case, 5 people can file insolvency. But if it is a bigger project, let's say 1000 or more flats are there, in that case 100, 1000, 10% is 100, or 10% of the total amount, whichever is less. So whichever is less can file an insolvency. So this is the issue which is being amended recently. Now this amendment was brought in December 2020. It got confirmed somewhere in I think March. Now this is the law as on date. What has happened? Many of the home buyers have challenged this amendment, and it is also again pending in Supreme Court. We don't know what Supreme Court would decide, but as of now, the law is challenged before Supreme Court because the limit was increased. Many of the home buyers have said that we will not be able to contact 100 people and get together on board to file a case. So let's see what happens. But the law has been amended. This is pending in Manish Kumar Jain versus Union of India. You can read these all things in leisure. Now, broadly speaking, insolvency starts 30th day COC forms. They try to bring resolution by publishing announcement in the newspapers that please bid for this company. Discussions and negotiation happen in the COC. It could be possible they might receive a plan, negotiate, get some more money, and by 270th day, they can place the plan, approve it, and get it approved from NCLT. So first COC has to approve, then NCLT has to approve. If both of them approve, then it is resolution. If it is not approved by 66% majority, it comes under liquidation. Now liquidation, again the flow chart is same thing will be distributed. Recently, two more things have come up by Supreme Court judgment that this 270th day is the timeline usually. But if suppose there is some case pending in NCLT, some other litigation issue has come, then 60 days more can be given after 270th day. Thereafter, if liquidation is started from the date of initiation of liquidation and 1 year, all the assets should be sold. If they are not sold, then liquidator will have to explain to NCLT why it could not be sold in 1 year, and probably NCLT may extend the timeline also. In fact, recently, yesterday only, I got an order After 1 year, we got it extended more by 1 year because there were huge assets and various litigation pending. So therefore, this is possible. In liquidation, litigation will start again. This moratorium is only for the period of insolvency resolution process, not for liquidation. In liquidation, all litigation will start again. Now, only 5 minutes more I will take to discuss on. Okay, I think 7:20 is there. So I will just fastly rush through the uh, resolution, and then I can think we can take for queries. So resolution plan means that during resolution, liquidation process would be kept in mind. So I told in the example, 100 rupees debt, 40 rupees will get the liquidation value. Now somebody may come and purchase it at 40, maybe purchase at 45. So that money will be paid to all the people. Now the money will be paid in accordance with the waterfall which we have discussed. Exactly the waterfall will be followed. Now distribution will be in accordance with the all the applicable laws. Now, how does all the applicable laws come into picture? Let's say the person who is coming, he says that I want maybe a waiver of uh, ROC fees. The person who is coming to buy, he says, sir, waiver from XYZ approval. Like, for example, if I am buying a coal company, I would want that mines allotted to the company would continue even after the approval of resolution plan. So NCLT cannot give approval of other law. They can only approve what is in their hands. So their hands, they have specific limitation. Law says they will have to go and take approval from the relevant regulatory authority. So in case of coal, it could be some government agency who is dealing with the mining department. Let's say it's a telecom company. Let's say ASL resolution plan is already approved. So in that case, it could be TRAI, Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. In case of, let's say, it could be a listed company. So SEBI approval may be required if they are going to merge it with some other company. Like pharma companies, two pharma companies are merging, then Competition Commission of India will also come into picture. Two cement companies are merging, then Competition Commission will come. So whatever be the regulatory company, maybe let's say it's a NBFC, it will be going to merge in another company, then RBI approval might be required. So whatever is the regulatory requirement that has to be fulfilled. Once it is approved, it is binding on all stakeholders. Nobody can say that I do not agree with the plan. So the persons who are in the down of waterfall, they cannot say that I will not follow this plan, because that plan is applicable. If that plan says that he will get nothing, he will not get anything. Like in case of suppliers, we have seen most of the suppliers are not getting any payment when the company is resolved. So as per law, they are not getting, so not getting. They cannot say that company's plan is violative of law. It is in compliance of law. So it could be possible. Some of the people who are stakeholder, who are creditor in the company may get zero. It is possible. Normally, my experience is operational creditors are getting zero. However, in some companies, I have seen from my experience that the new persons who are coming and buying the company, they are very much intelligent to keep good relations with the creditor. They pay some amount. Like for example, in SR Steel, I will tell you, they have paid some 25% amount to all the creditors below 1 crore. So some formula they work out and pay, but that is ex gratia, means that is out of courtesy, not out of law. There is no law which says you have to pay. They have to pay minimum what is there in liquidation value. So 40 rupees is liquidation value, and that the priority is set as per 40 rupees. Over and above 40 rupees, they can pay from their own will. Nobody can say you have to pay. There is no mandation. Once it is approved, other claims will automatically get extinguished. And the most important part, which I was telling you, if there is some litigation pending of tax matters, is a very interesting and good judgment which has come, Rajasthan High Court judgment in Binani Cement. It says clean slate theory. They say the person who is going to buy the company, he is going to get a clean slate. So if tax dues are pending, as per IBC waterfall, as per that flow chart, they are going to get nothing. So when I am buying the company, I will not have to pay the tax department for old litigation. Obviously, when I'm going to work in the company and new dues, new income will be there, I will pay taxes. But old tax dues, zero. And this is called clean slate theory. So sometimes, if you get time, please read this clean slate theory because it is not in law, but it has been explained very well by the Rajasthan High Court in the judgment of Binani, which is now with the Ultratech. Now, another query which normally people ask me that, sir, a company goes into insolvency and we are shareholder of this listed company. What should we do? Will we get anything? So, friends, they are not getting anything. Very few corporates are continuing the shareholders also. Otherwise, mostly they go for delisting or reduction of share capital to zero. Like in the case of Alok Industries, Reliance has taken over Alok Industries. So from 10 rupees face value share, they have reduced the share to 1 rupee. Now, as per the waterfall, they are required to pay nothing to shareholder. But maybe Reliance has some other plan. So if they have continued them. So it is possible. It depends only on company to company what they are offering other than the liquidation value. Now, people also ask me sometimes, being a chartered accountant, also people say, sir, should we keep invested? See, insolvency, like if you see Jet Airways, I think it touched 2 rupees, 3 rupees also when there was no buyer. And today it is again back to some 30, 40 rupees per share. So that will happen. If there is a buyer, the money will increase, the share price would increase. No buyer, it would reduce. And the most important part, the resolution plan may provide for X amount to shareholders, may not provide for amount to shareholders. Like Lakshmi Vilas Bank, we all are aware, overnight it was approved. I have my own personal doubts on that, whether it will test in Supreme Court or not. But today they have immediately merged it with DBS and there is no trading and delisted immediately. So possibility just like this in liquidation or resolution also. Now, sometimes this is the query of most of the persons who have attended my seminar. Therefore, I have included this. Can we make a settlement with the person who has filed? Yes, you can. So if somebody has filed a case, you want to settle it out of the court, you can settle and that person can withdraw. Mutually, you both can settle and withdraw, no problem. But if the once the insolvency started, then before formation of COC, that is completion of 30 days, you can withdraw by paying the applicant, that may be an operational creditor or a financial creditor, plus the insolvency professional who has been appointed, his fees and his expenses. So what will be his expenses? This publication of announcement in the newspaper is the expense, or maybe he has deployed one or two person to take the charge of the asset of the company. All those expenses company has to bear. After 30 days, yes, again it is possible, but then the committee of creditors should agree. So 90% of committee of creditors should agree, the original petitioner should agree, and all expenses should be paid. All three should be done. Then settlement is possible. So these are three scenarios of settlement. And the most important part, if the shareholders, creditors, anybody is aware of some wrongdoing of the promoters, then insolvency process also takes care of the errant promoters, I would say mischievous promoters. If they have diverted money, then there is a PFU transactions which is seen. So I will just explain in short. Preferential, fraudulent, undervalue, and extortionate. Now, normally people popularly hear in the newspaper, you must also have heard about this forensic audit. So forensic audit is for existing four types of transactions which are being done. Now, what is preferential? So let me explain what is preferential. Like, see, I have to make the payment. I am the owner of the company. I have to make payment. So let's say I have to make payment to my, let's say, sister concern. Let's say to my brother, to my sister. He is also doing business, genuine transaction. But I have to make payment to him also and to mothers also. And I choose to pay my sister concern rather than third party. so that money comes into my family only, because I know that my company is going to become insolvent. In that case, if preferential transactions are done just to not pay others and just to divert money from the company, these transactions can be reversed by NCLT. So this is called preferential transaction. Second is undervalue transaction. Means suppose normally a flat price which I am selling in the market is of 1 crore and I sell to you at 20 lakhs. So 80 lakhs is actually undervalued. So this undervalued transaction can be reversed. Either that property will come to the company or that 80 lakh rupees will be ordered by NCLT from that person who has bought it to be paid to the company. So such type of transactions can be reversed by NCLT. Third is fraudulent transaction. It has been done to do a fraud on the company. Now, various cases I have come nowadays. In fact, every second day we are hearing in the newspaper, companies are doing fake billing just to get loans, making fake sales. All those are fraudulent transactions. And once declared fraudulent, that money has to be deposited back to the company. Fourth is extortionate credit transaction. Now, this is very interesting limb and very less used section in India. However, it is more used in US and Europe countries. What is it? Like normally the company is getting loan at 12 rupees and just to siphon off the money, they have taken loan at 36% interest. So this 12% minus 36% is about 24% bigger amount to siphon off the money from the company. Therefore, if a transaction is declared extortionate credit transactions by the insolvency professional, then obviously NCLT will say to reverse it. Now, the limitation is the insolvency professional can do a forensic audit, get forensic audit done by a third party, but time period is fixed 1 year for unrelated and 2 years for related party. Now, in one of our case, we have got an order even beyond 2 years. So courts are very aggressive when they come to know of fraud. And interestingly, there's a around 180 or 200 pages judgment of Jayaprakash case only, JP Infra, where 858 acres of land, which was given to the holding company as a security, given to banks as a security for loan given to JP Associates Limited, that has been reversed and confirmed by Supreme Court. From NCLT to NCLAT to Supreme Court, everywhere they have considered it. NCLAT gave a negative view. However, Supreme Court has confirmed this particular transaction as preferential and reversed the transaction of 858 acres of land. So you can understand the impact of these sections. Then another important aspect, but yes, we have shortage of time, so I will not go very much deep into it. That is who can buy a company. So a defaulter cannot buy a company. So if I am a defaulter, I am myself an NPA, I cannot buy a company under insolvency. So that was one of the point which was being raised by Baba Ramdev in the case of Ruchi Soya. Whether it is correct or not, but the market report suggests that that is the reason why Adani withdrew. And this was the reason it was published in one of the magazine called The Wire that Adani Wilmar, which was one of the contestant to buy Ruchi Soya, had links. The head of the Adani was linked to a willful defaulter because of his relationship, and therefore he was disqualified, and therefore he withdrew his bid. So we don't know actual story because that may be confidential, but this is what the newspapers report suggest, that yes, there was a willful defaulter clause which had made them defaulted in buying Ruchi Soya. So this is just a sequence of how the law has been evolved over the year, right from 2015 till 2019 and 20. Also, there are two amendments recently. So I'm not included 20 amendments, but broadly what I'm telling you is law has been evolving every 6 months. And every 6 months we need to buy a new book, obviously. As a lawyer, we need to keep ourselves updated of this law. So when we are talking about IBC law, broadly speaking, we have to be updated and we have to keep on updating what is the view of the court. Right now, real estate industry is a complex industry vis-a-vis IBC law. Why so? Just 2 or 3 points with respect to this. Whether a person who has paid money, if he has not been given an allotment letter, whether he will be considered as an allottee or not. So that is an issue which is going on in the market. So it has to be adjudicated whether he's an allottee or not. Second is sometimes people are paying the money. They do not have allotment letter. They do not have sale deed. They do not have any document except the receipt of the payment. In that case, whether they will be treated as secured creditor or unsecured, that is again 50-50 going on. There is no clear cut case till now which has been decided by Supreme Court. My personal view is if substantial payment has been done, then he should be qualified as an allottee and he should be given the property. Till date, Supreme Court view is most of the cases, whether it is JP, whether it is Amrapali, other cases of real estate, mostly the view consistently taken by all the courts is property should be delivered to the home buyer rather than disabandoning the project itself. So that is very important. Property should be delivered. That is the intention of all the courts. Because in the worst come worst scenario, these people who have put their hard-earned money may not get property because under liquidation they will get money. So it is possible that a person has invested 1 crore and he might get 5 rupees or maybe nothing. It is possible. So that is a very unending debate. So I will leave it to some other day. But as of now, I think I have completed the session and now we should be taking all the queries.
Sure, sir. Dear participant, please raise your hands. Whomsoever would like to
So
ask a
Mr.
question. Sir.
Nirav has raised hands.
Okay.
So I have allowed Mr. Nirav. Yes, Mr.
Yeah,
Nirav,
yeah,
please.
Neeraj, please go on.
Yeah, yeah. And Nipun bhai, thanks for giving this wonderful lecture on this thing. I have two questions on the settlement aspect and one question on the claim aspect.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. On the settlement, you said three categories. First is the prior one. So I think normally the thing starts with the lender or the creditor writing a notice of IBC, and there are some settlements done at that stage. If that
Correct.
stage is missed, if that stage is not taken care, then the next stage is filing the NCLT uh, notice by paying some whatever is the amount to be paid in the court. So at that stage, what is the process for settlement? That is one thing. And secondly, and how can it be done? That is the process point of view.
Okay, so let me take you again to the PPT. Now
Yeah.
you see, if before formation of COC, that means case is admitted by NCLT,
Okay.
insolvency professional is appointed, and he gives a publication because he has to immediately give it in within 3 days of the order that is required to be published. So once he publishes, what is the onus of the company? Company has to pay 3%. One
Mm,
is the actual petitioner
mm,
because of whom insolvency started.
mm,
Second, he has to pay the insolvency professional his fees because he
mm.
has devoted time.
Correct.
Third is the expenses incurred. So expense would be publication in the newspaper.
Mm,
And normally, whenever insolvency process starts, he deploys his own person to take the custody of the project. It could be project, it could be factory, it could be assets of the company.
yeah.
Everywhere he would become the owner. Also in the bank accounts, the signatory changes to insolvency professional. So all those work which he does, he has to be compensated.
Agreed.
If post COC,
Mm,
post COC, it is a difficult task, very difficult task, because in that case, all the bankers will come in the committee, and 90% voting has to be in favor of settle. So in addition to all these three expenses which I have told you, one more addition would be all bankers should agree. So it happened recently with one of our case that 90% agreed,
correct.
but a small bank like SIDBI did not agree. So SIDBI did not agree, so it was not possible. Because
Okay.
suppose 90% agree, then insolvency is withdrawn. Okay, he pays to the 90%, but now the SIDBI becomes the main bank.
Hmm.
So he might again go for insolvency. SIDBI will file for insolvency. So it becomes very difficult on post formation of COC in my experience.
Mhm. Yeah, Nipun bhai, thanks. I just wanted to add to that part. The second part of the question is, like, if you said the what are the remedies available to the party who is I'm talking from the both the aspects to understand the principle of law. Is what does a party who is just filing a NCLT notice in the court and within a week he wants to do the settlement, so nothing has started so far.
So that is
And
pre-admission stage.
pre-admission, correct, correct. And second thing is the remedy available to the party against whom it has been filed. So can they both settle it separately, and are they supposed to file some consent terms, or what is the process like? How will they be able to achieve that
So
thing?
what you are asking is pre-admission stage.
Pre-admission stage. Yes, yes.
That means case is just filed in the court. Once it is
Yeah.
filed and you are making a settlement, suppose uh, let's say the due is 1 crore. Now
Mm.
company is not able to pay 1 crore in one single shot. So what
Yeah.
they will do is they will do some consent terms. They will sign some MOU or a settlement agreement, and that
Correct.
agreement will be submitted jointly by both the parties in the court.
Okay.
So court will only record that the petitioner is withdrawing based on the settlement agreement filed by the parties jointly.
Okay.
Then, if that settlement agreement is breached, again insolvency case will revive.
Exactly. Correct.
Correct. So
Okay.
this is the normal process. Now, if
Yeah.
one shot payment is made, the petition does not survive. So the
Okay.
only thing company will have to put on record is see the total payment is made, and the
Mhm.
case becomes infructuous.
Okay. So the second part of it is the if today, as you have explained, the complete waterfall in which the supplier doesn't stand to get anything at the end of the waterfall,
Correct, correct, correct.
right? The I think, as you said, it's a zero amount which he'll be getting it. So if the capital of the company against whom he is filing it is around say 200 crores and his dues is only 2 crores, so the company can very well say, boss, you are not going to get anything. And
Correct.
can the NCLT shake up the company for 2 crores dues for a
Yes,
this
definitely. Here,
can
the insolvency is a remedy in REM. Remedy in REM means insolvency can be triggered by anybody.
yeah.
Maybe I am not getting anything. I am
Hmm.
standing in the last in the line. But
Hmm.
if the company's intention is to go on, they want
Hmm.
to protect the company, do the business, they will definitely satisfy that particular credit.
Okay.
And that is what the beauty of this case is. In fact, I tell you, the cases against the company in civil court has reduced in these 3 years because
Hmm.
people now prefer insolvency petition rather than going to a civil court. Because
Okay.
people say, let's take a chance in NCLT. If we win the case, company will definitely come and do the settlement. Otherwise, in civil court, the matter goes on for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years.
Okay. No, I understood, sir. And just last question on the claim part is, if, as you rightly said, the public notice is issued for inviting claims and somebody misses that notice, can those claims be added at a later stage, or it is at
Uh,
the discretion of the professional who has been who decides?
Now, sir, there are 2, 3 things to it. See, as per the publication of the notice, law, the publication will say you have to submit your claim within 14 days
Correct.
because he has to make a cutoff date for forming the committee of creditors. Now,
Exactly.
Regulation 12(2) of IBBI CIRP process says even after 90 days till 14 to 90, if he gets a claim, he can accept. After 90, law prohibits to accept any claim.
Okay.
So that is the law. However, recently some judgments have come when somebody has missed the bus even after 90 days.
Hmm.
Through permission of the court can be granted and that claim can be admitted. However, if the resolution plan is passed, approved, then no claim will be entertained. That is very
Correct.
clear.
Yeah.
And after 180 days expiry, no claim will be taken into record.
Okay. I think thank you very much for giving an opportunity to ask you questions. Thanks. I'm done, sir.
नीरव जी
You're welcome,
represent
Nirav.
शाकुर जी पालन जी, तो He's come also with a vast experience.
Great,
Please
great.
raise your hand. Anybody else?
I think we have got one more question from Miss
Can I
Priyanka. Can a company go for insolvency on its own? Yes, Priyanka ji, it can go on its own, and it's called Section 10 insolvency. So a company can go. What is the procedure? Procedure is board of directors has to approve the decision to be going for insolvency. Then they will have to call a shareholders meeting and pass a resolution in shareholders meeting with special majority. So basically 75% has to agree to take the company into insolvency. Now, if you ask my experience, Section 10 is normally not preferred by the company if there are public shareholders. Company would try to tell some creditor only to file the case and get it admitted rather than following the complete process of calling shareholders meeting and doing everything.
Okay. Anybody else would like to ask a question? Please raise your hand, or we'll end the session. I think there are no more questions. So, thank you, Nipun sir, for highlighting such a vast subject in such a short span of time and giving your means. Actually, we are thankful to you. You made available yourself for highlighting this session, who is a core part of forming this IBC code. So we are CredIMC is really thankful to you, sir, and would look forward for your more and more such a session for our participants.
Thank you very much, sir. And I think somebody has asked for my details. So I would just share it. In fact, my PPT also contains my email ID and my mobile number. So I would just share it on the chat box also. So I just shared my personal mobile number and email ID also. PPT would be shared in by Credai only. And I'm very much thankful to Credai for giving me this opportunity. And it's always a pleasure to share the experience. And I always look forward to such webinars and conference to share my insolvency experience because this law is very much near to my heart. And I always love interacting with different industry people so that we also get some new insights into the law.
Correct.
I'm very much thankful to you. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, sir. Bye. Good night, sir.
Good night. Good night, everyone.